I stood outside my own front door at 8:17 p.m., barefoot, a grocery bag cutting into my fingers. The porch light flicked on above me. Inside, I heard the soft click of the deadbolt sliding into place. "Daniel?" I said, my voice thin. "What are you doing?" He didn't open the door. He didn't even step closer. He just stood there, a shadow behind the glass, and said, calm as anything, "You don't live here anymore." For a second, I thought I heard him wrong. Then I saw her. Chloe sat on my couch, legs tucked under her, holding my mug. My mug. She didn't look surprised. She looked settled, like she belonged there. "Open the door," I said, knocking harder now. "Daniel, stop this." Instead, the door opened just enough for him to push something through. My suitcase. It hit the porch with a dull thud. "I packed your things," he said. My heart dropped into my stomach. "You packed? What are you talking about?" He looked at me, steady, almost bored. "Mom," he said, "just take your things and go." The porch light stayed on. Across the street, curtains shifted. I could feel eyes on me. I knocked again. Harder this time, the sound echoing down the quiet street. "Daniel, open this door right now." Nothing. Through the glass, I saw him turn away. Chloe leaned closer to him, whispering something. He nodded, like I wasn't even there. "Daniel." My voice cracked. Then he came back to the door, but still didn't open it. "You signed everything over," he said. "Don't make this ugly." The words hit me like cold water. "I what?" "You signed the papers," he repeated, slower this time, like I was the one who didn't understand. I stepped back, shaking my head. "No. No, I didn't." But even as I said it, something tugged at the back of my mind. Something I couldn't quite place. He sighed, already tired of me. "Just take your things." The lock stayed firm, and I stood there, frozen, because I knew one thing for sure. I had never signed anything like that. I spent that night in my car. I parked 2 streets away so I wouldn't have to see the house. My house. The grocery bag sat in the passenger seat, still full. I didn't touch it. I just sat there, hands on the wheel, staring at nothing. "You signed everything over." His voice kept replaying in my head, over and over again. It didn't make sense. None of it did. I had never signed my house away. I wasn't careless. I knew better than that. But sometime around dawn, when the sky turned that soft gray blue, something clicked. A memory. 3 weeks earlier, Daniel had come over with a folder. He said it was just insurance paperwork. Something about updating records, making things easier, in case anything ever happened. I remembered sitting at the kitchen table. Chloe had been there too, standing behind him, watching. "You should trust your son," she'd said softly. I closed my eyes in the car. My stomach dropped. What exactly had I signed? By 9 the next morning, I was sitting across from a bank manager with shaking hands. Her name tag read Mrs. Carter. She had kind eyes, but they changed the moment she pulled up my file. "Is everything okay?" she asked carefully. "I just need copies," I said. "Anything recent? Property related?" She nodded and turned her screen toward herself. Her fingers moved quickly over the keyboard. Then she stopped. Her expression shifted. Slowly, she looked up at me. "Ma'am," she said, hesitating. "This document, it transfers ownership of your home." The room went quiet. "I'm sorry, what?" She turned the screen slightly, so I could see. There it was. My address. My signature. And Daniel's name listed as the new owner. My chest tightened. "That's not right." She didn't argue. She just said gently, "It's been processed." I stared at the screen, my pulse pounding in my ears. Because according to that document, my son now legally owned my house. I called him from the bank parking lot. He picked up on the second ring. "What?" he said, like I was interrupting something important. "What did you do?" My voice shook despite how hard I tried to study it. A pause. Then, calmly, "You saw it." "You tricked me," I said. "That wasn't insurance paperwork." "It was paperwork," he replied. "You just didn't read it." The words landed like a slap. "Daniel," I whispered, "that's my home." "No," he said. "It's mine now." I closed my eyes. Why? Another pause. Longer this time. Then he said, I needed control.
Control.
And Chloe deserves stability, he added, like that explained everything. I let out a hollow laugh. So you steal from your mother? I didn't steal anything, he snapped. You signed it. There it was again. That cold, clean justification. I realized something then. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't confusion. He had chosen this. He had chosen her. I couldn't stop thinking about that night at the kitchen table. The folder.
The pen.
The way Daniel had rushed me. It's just routine, he'd said. Nothing complicated. I remembered how tired I'd been. It had been a long day. My eyes had skimmed the pages, trusting him to explain. And Chloe. She had stood just behind him, close enough to feel her presence. Everything looks standard, she'd said, smiling politely. You should trust your son. At the time, it had sounded harmless. Supportive, even. Now it felt rehearsed. I remembered the way Daniel had flipped the pages quickly, pointing where I should sign.
Here.
And here. I hadn't questioned it. Why would I? He was my son. The realization settled in slowly, like something heavy sinking to the bottom of deep water. This wasn't just Daniel. This was planned. Every word. Every moment. They hadn't just taken my house. They had used my trust to do it. The motel room smelled like stale air and cheap cleaner. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the keycard in my hand like it didn't belong to me. 30 years. 30 years of working, saving, fixing, building. All gone in one signature. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, and pressed my hands against my face. I raised him. I whispered. The words sounded small in that room. I thought about the nights I stayed up late balancing bills. The mornings I woke early to pack his lunches. The years I put everything into making sure he had a good life. And this was where it ended. Locked out. Replaced. I let out a shaky breath and looked around the room. A bed that wasn't mine. Walls that weren't mine. Silence that felt too loud. Then something shifted inside me. A small, quiet thought. Because while Daniel had taken the house, I had built everything that made it possible. And people who build things don't just disappear. I barely slept. When I did, it came in short, restless bursts. By morning, my head felt heavy, but my thoughts were sharper. I sat at the small motel table, staring at nothing, when something strange surfaced in my memory. A detail I hadn't thought about in years. The house. It hadn't originally been under my current name. After my husband died, there had been paperwork. A lawyer. Long conversations I barely understood at the time. Something about protection. Structure. I stood up slowly. There had been documents. Older ones. Not the recent ones Daniel showed me. Important ones. I need to check something. I murmured to myself. Because if I remembered correctly, that house wasn't as simple as Daniel thought. The storage unit smelled like dust and cardboard. I hadn't been there in over 5 years. Boxes lined the walls, stacked high, labeled in my handwriting from another time. I moved slowly, my hands brushing over faded markers and old tape. Taxes, photos, documents. Finally, I found it. A box marked legal. My heart started to beat faster as I pulled it down and set it on the floor. Inside were folders. Old ones. Neatly arranged. I flipped through them carefully, my fingers trembling. Then I saw it. A thick folder with my husband's name on it. I opened it. Papers slid into view, filled with legal language I didn't fully understand. But one document stood out. The original deed. I sat back on my heels, staring at it. Because attached to it was a clause I had completely forgotten existed. I spread the papers across the small table in the storage unit office. The words blurred at first, but I forced myself to focus. Line by line. Slowly. And then I saw it. Buried deep in the document, surrounded by dense legal language, was a single line that made my breath catch. Ownership transfer required secondary verification tied to the original trust structure.
I read it again. And again.
My pulse quickened. This wasn't just a simple deed. There was another layer. A condition. A requirement Daniel never mentioned. I leaned back in the chair, my mind racing. If that clause was still valid, then what he did might not hold. For the first time since that night on the porch, something shifted inside me. Not hope, not yet, but something close to it. Because maybe, just maybe, the transfer wasn't as final as he believed. I walked into the lawyer's office with a folder clutched tightly in my hands. His name was Mark Reynolds. Mid-50s, calm eyes, the kind of man who didn't rush. He listened as I explained everything, the lockout, the papers, the bank. Then he opened the folder. He read slowly,
Carefully.
no interruptions, no reactions, just silence and the quiet sound of pages turning. Finally, he leaned back in his chair. They made a mistake, he said. I blinked. What kind of mistake? He tapped the document. A very big one. My heart started to race. Your son filed a standard ownership transfer, he continued. But this property isn't standard. I leaned forward. What does that mean? He looked directly at me. It means what he thinks he owns, he doesn't fully understand. For the first time since that night, I felt something solid beneath my feet. Because this wasn't over. Not even close. Mark spread the documents out neatly on his desk. This house, he said, was placed into a family trust after your husband passed. I nodded slowly. I remember signing something like that. He tapped the page. That wasn't just routine. It created a legal structure. A structure?
I asked. Yes.
One that controls how ownership can be transferred. He looked at me carefully. Your son didn't account for that. My chest tightened. So, he doesn't actually own it? Not outright, Mark said. And possibly not at all. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. He continued. Any transfer would require compliance with the trust terms. And from what I see here, he paused. Those terms were not met. I stared at the papers, my mind catching up. Daniel had been so confident, so sure. But he had missed something. And that one oversight might change everything. I sat there, trying to take it all in. So, who controls the trust? I asked. Mark didn't hesitate. You do. The words landed quietly, but they changed everything. Even now. I asked. Yes, he said. Nothing in these documents shows you relinquished control. I leaned back, stunned. All decisions tied to this property must go through you as the controlling authority. I let out a slow breath. Daniel thought he had taken everything from me, but he hadn't taken this. Not even close. Mark folded his hands. Which means we have leverage. Leverage, I repeated.
Yes.
And options. I looked down at the papers again. For days, I had felt like everything was slipping away. Now, for the first time, I realized something important. I wasn't powerless. I had just been quiet. A week later, I drove past the house. I hadn't planned to stop. But when I saw the cars lining the street, I slowed down. Music drifted through the open windows. Laughter. I parked across the road and watched. Through the front window, I saw Daniel moving around, smiling, shaking hands. Chloe stood beside him, laughing like she belonged there. People held drinks. They looked comfortable. At home. My home. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel. One of the neighbors stepped onto the porch and said something. Daniel laughed. Like nothing had happened. Like I had never existed. For a moment, anger rose in my chest. Sharp and hot. But I didn't move. I didn't knock. I just watched. Because Daniel believed he had already won. And sometimes, that's when people make their biggest mistakes. The next day, I ran into Mrs. Harper at the grocery store. She hesitated when she saw me. I didn't know if I should say anything. She began carefully. You can, I said. She sighed. There was a party. Your son. He introduced Chloe as the new homeowner. I nodded once. She seemed very comfortable, Mrs. Harper added. I forced a small smile. I'm sure she did. Mrs. Harper looked at me with concern. Are you okay?
I thought about that.
About the house. About Daniel. About everything. I will be, I said. And I meant it. Because I wasn't reacting anymore. I wasn't chasing explanations or demanding answers. I was preparing. And Daniel didn't know that. Not yet. Mark filed the motion 3 days later. Quietly. No warning. No announcement. Just paperwork submitted through the proper channels. What happens now?
I asked. We wait, he said.
For what? For him to respond. I nodded. It felt strange doing nothing. But this wasn't nothing. This was positioning. Every document, every clause, every line we submitted was part of something bigger. And Daniel had no idea. He still thought this was over. That I had accepted it. That I had walked away. But I hadn't. I had just stepped back. Daniel called me 3 days later. His voice was sharp. What is this legal notice? I sat calmly at the motel table. You should read it carefully. I did read it, he snapped. It doesn't make sense. Then read it again. There was a pause. I could hear paper shuffling. Then silence. Longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. What is this about a trust? I didn't answer right away. Because for the first time, he sounded unsure. He showed up at the motel that evening. No warning. Just a hard knock on the door. When I opened it, he stood there, tense, eyes searching mine. This is my house, he said. I looked at him steadily. No, I said. It's not. He frowned. You signed it over. You skipped something, I replied. What are you talking about? I didn't explain. I didn't argue. I just held his gaze. And slowly I saw it. That shift. That crack. For the first time since that night, Daniel wasn't certain. The court filings laid everything out. The trust. The clause. The missing verification. Mark walked me through it step by step. It's all here, he said. Clear and consistent. I nodded. And there's more, he added. What do you mean? He handed me another page. Emails. Documents. Records tied to the transfer. Chloe's name appeared more than once. She was involved, I said quietly. Yes, Mark replied. And that matters. I stared at the page. Because this wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about how it happened. And who made sure it did. Chloe called me. I didn't expect that. Her voice was tight. I didn't know it would go this far. I stayed quiet. This was Daniel's idea, she added quickly. I almost laughed. You stood there, I said. You watched me sign. I thought everything was legal, she said. That's not what you said then. Silence. Then softer. This isn't what I wanted. I ended the call. Because now I understood something clearly. Their plan worked as long as it was easy. As long as no one pushed back. But now? It was starting to fall apart. The courtroom felt smaller than I expected. Daniel sat across from me, avoiding my eyes. His lawyer spoke confidently. She intended to transfer ownership, he argued. Mark stayed calm. Intent doesn't override structure, he replied. The judge listened. Quiet. Focused. Then Mark stood. We'd like to present additional documentation. I felt my chest tighten. Because this was it. The moment everything turned. Mark placed the document on the table. The original trust certification, he said. The judge examined it closely. Pages turned. Silence filled the room. Then Mark spoke again. This confirms one key point. I held my breath. That control was never transferred. The judge looked up. And in that moment, everything shifted. The ruling came shortly after. The transfer is invalid, the judge said. My heart pounded. Ownership remains with the original holder. Daniel's shoulders dropped. He has no legal claim to the property. The words echoed in my mind. It was over. But it wasn't. Because now, everything had to change. I walked up to the house again. This time, I wasn't alone. The locksmith stood beside me. Daniel opened the door before we knocked. He didn't speak. He just looked at me. I met his gaze. You need to leave, I said. No anger. No raised voice. Just truth. And this time, he couldn't argue. Weeks later, the house was quiet again. Everything was back where it belonged. But it felt different. I moved slowly through each room, noticing things I had taken for granted. The light. The silence. The space. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I just lived. And one afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table with a new document in front of me.
My will.
I signed it carefully, because some lessons only come once. And I wasn't going to forget this one. He thought he took my home, but all he really did was show me who he was. And that changed everything.